Hey gang, what's poppin'? So we are talking about two new critical lenses. We've been thinking here and there about the new historicist lens, looking at literature or texts through the perspective of how they connect to history and what they show about the creator's ideas relating to history. Today we're getting into two new lenses, and that is the feminist and the Marxist critical lens. So first, we have the feminist lens. The feminist lens is, just as it would sound, something that deals with examining gender and its depictions within a piece of literature. So specifically, it examines gender politics, the way that the genders interact within a work. And it traces the way that we define masculinity and femininity, as well as their social status or marginalization within works. So, to simplify all of that, how the genders interact, how the genders are defined, and how those genders may come into conflict or be marginalized. So the big question that we need to ask when we're looking through this lens is, how does this text reinforce, critique, or challenge definitions of masculinity and or femininity? Does it support traditional views of those things? Does it suggest that there need to be changes? Does it challenge ideas that might be long held, or in the case of The Great Gatsby, have been held 100 years ago? If we're going deeper into this, deeper questions might ask things like this. So, what does the work reveal about the operations of patriarchy? Or in other words, a male-dominated society? It's pretty much unquestionable that in the 1920s we had patriarchy. We had a male-dominated society. Okay, another question. How are women portrayed? And how do these portrayals relate to gender issues of the time period? Does the work support those gender norms, or does it push against those gender norms? How does the work define masculinity or femininity? That is, how does the work define an ideal man or an ideal woman? Do the characters' behaviors conform to their assigned genders, or do they exist outside of those assigned genders? Does the work accept, question, or reject traditional views of gender? And how do things like race or class or other cultural factors affect a woman's experience, particularly within that time frame? Now, if we're trying to apply this, we're trying to be as precise as possible, particularly if we're putting together a claim. So here's an example of what not to do. Okay, if we are going to look at Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet through the feminist lens, okay, something like this, Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet shows that women were treated unfairly. I mean, obviously that's true, that's a fair critique, but that is simply not where we're at in terms of depth, in terms of precision, or in terms of meaningful thoughtfulness. There's not enough specific context, there's no context to speak of, and in all, it's pretty lame. If we're going deeper into this question, this might be something we'd hope to come up with, as a claim or as merely an idea. Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet challenges the prescribed gender roles of the 16th century by suggesting that a lack of freedom can lead young women to make self-destructive decisions. See, it's telling us how the gender norms of that time period affected young women. It's going much, much deeper and thinking about context and specificity. Next, we have the Marxist lens. So I'm going to go ahead and preface this by saying the fact that it's called the Marxist lens should not make anybody freak out. That's happened in the past. Just understand that the Marxist lens is based off of the idea of examining social class and the relationship between those two. Nothing to freak out about here, people. Anyways, the Marxist lens is concerned with the relationship between economic and social classes. Specifically, struggles that may arise between these classes and the ways in which they interact with one another. Our essential questions when we're thinking about the Marxist lens are as such. How does this text present or question social and economic class? Or how does this text examine struggles with or against power? Deeper questions might be things like this. Which class does the work claim or seem to represent? Who is this speaking for? The upper class, the middle class, the lower class? How do characters interact with the establishment, that meaning the major power structures in place? What class values does it reinforce? What class values does it subvert? Does it seem to go against? Does it say to seem are wrong? What conflict can be seen between the values the work champions and those it portrays? What social classes do the characters represent, and how are they represented? And how do characters from different classes interact or conflict with one another? If we're thinking about something like Of Mice and Men, this is another example of something that we would not want in terms of a critique. Of Mice and Men shows that poverty is hard. Okay, that's great. It's not specific enough. There's no context. Once again, that's pretty lame. It's also quite obvious on the surface. We need to dig in a little bit deeper. So something like this. Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men offers the idea that those from higher socioeconomic classes often use their status to dominate and silence lower classes. We're getting a little bit more specific here. We're able to generate much more meaningful thinking around this, and it's up for debate. We're able to talk about this and question this, agree or disagree with this, and have meaningful discourse. All right, crew. So make sure that you answer the question in the classroom after you're done watching this. Have a great day. We'll see you later.